Adventure, anarchy, and life-changing experiences characterize the Wild West. However, not every one of those instances was as you may have anticipated. Some were odd. A sneaker crafted from the skin of a known outlaw and a mound of bison skulls is both startling and completely wrong. The wild and sometimes eerie side of history is captured in the pictures we will examine. Let's explore these fantastic Wild West indecent pictures in more detail. Mountain of Bison Skulls. By the late 19th century, a startling picture emerged. The image was shot in 1892 near the Michigan Carbon Works and included a mound of bison skulls. The location was haunting because it symbolized the most complete loss of the once powerful herds of bison that grazed North America. Let's get rid of buffalo, our brothers, who were murdered. Let's conceal it. 30 and 60 million bison inhabited the plain in the 18th century, but the situation changed as more humans moved west. Hunters came with weapons, and the increased demand for bison skins and bones fueled the widespread killing. By the late 1870s, most herds had vanished, leaving the terrain bare. Words cannot convey the narrative as an image does. The heaped bones seemed to be a natural feature of the terrain. Such a loss is difficult to fathom. The bones representing how much had been destroyed in a few decades stand out against the verdant terrain in front. It's challenging to comprehend its tremendous weight. Shake the Masked Outlaw. You may see a guy sitting there appearing a little tricky with a mask over his face, but he's dead. This was Wild West outlaw William Brazen Bill Brazelton, infamous for robbing stagecoaches in the region. With his rifle and handgun in hand, he concealed his face with a mask. His strategy was straightforward but audacious. He made the driver and passengers pay valuables, giving them little other option. Brazelton became well known in the area after allegedly carrying out 9 stagecoach robberies in Arizona and New Mexico. Nevertheless, on August 22, 1878, his criminal spree stopped. 2 miles south of Tucson, Arizona, he was apprehended by Pima County Sheriff Charles A. Scheibel and a 5-man patrol. After a bloody altercation, they discovered Brazelton and killed him. He had a rifle, a mask, 2 belts of cartridges, and handguns. He also possessed jewelry from past crimes, such as a gold chain-fastened watch and earrings. 2 pictures of his body were taken after his death, one with and one without the mask. The pictures are eerie. The Sandstorm. Midland, Texas, was threatened by a massive sandstorm on February 20th, 1894. The little town, which was only home to a few dispersed homes, water towers, and windmills, seemed to be about to be swallowed by a rolling wall of dust that rose hundreds of feet into the air. The air was thick with dust, and a robust and grit-filled breeze had likely started the stir. Looking carefully, you may see 2 individuals moving between fence gaps on the right side of the image as they stroll along a dirt road. The sight seems unsettling, as if they were hurrying to find cover before the storm struck the black clouds of sand. Even from a distance, the storm seemed to hum with power that kept getting closer. Awaiting the imminent collision, the windmills remained motionless. With nothing they could do to halt nature's force, the residents of Midland must have felt the weight of the dust in their necks and the dry wind tearing at their cheeks. The little community of Against the Storm seemed to be prepared for the worst. The Man in the Coffin. The following image depicts Reuben Houston Burroughs in a wooden coffin. Wearing rugged clothing, he holds a gun as if he were still prepared for a last battle. His expression is serene, as if he were just dozing off. One of the most dreaded outlaws in the South was Reuben Houston Burroughs. Between 1886 and 1890, he became renowned for his rail heists and was pursued by a horde of law enforcement and Pinkerton investigators. He was often likened to Jesse James, and his legend expanded with each successful heist. Burroughs' first heist occurred on December 1, 1886, in Benbrook, Texas. By January 1887, Reuben was brave enough to steal a train near Gordon, Texas, by himself, but he was later assisted by his brother Jim. This was no ordinary robbery. He took $4,200 from the express vehicle and left. Back then, that was a fortune. No other individual in history has ever accomplished this kind of feat on his own. He was apprehended in 1890, although his incarceration was brief. A few days after breaking out, he was killed in a brutal gunfight. Following his passing, his corpse was transported to Birmingham and displayed for the curious onlookers. It was then taken home to be buried. He would go down in history as one of the oldest West's most fearless outlaws, a man who lived and breathed firearms. Butch. One person who had an impact on the history of the American West was Butch Cassidy. He was not initially a criminal. He experimented with horse theft, but his crimes soon became more serious. He started stealing railroads and banks, quickly becoming known as one of the area's most wanted thieves. He was apprehended and spent a period in jail, but his narrative didn't have to stop there. Once free, he returned to his old ways and sided with the sun. Cassidy was a Dan youngster who helped create the Wild Bunch. This infamous gang was well known for its audacious thefts. Their strategy was audacious. After years of avoiding arrest, they attacked quickly and disappeared before anyone could stop them. According to rumors, Cassidy and the Sundance Kid were shot and died in Bolivia. People continue to discuss them even though the circumstances surrounding their death are still unknown. Numerous novels and films have been based on their narrative. Billy the Kid. The life of Billy the Kid was fascinating. Although he was born in New York in 1859, his destiny was not to remain there. He became fascinated by the chaos and excitement of the Wild West and soon became known for making a big scene. Billy gained notoriety during the Lincoln County War. He joined a band of ranchers known as the Regulators. They were engaged in a heated altercation with the House, a competing organization. Billy was constantly in the center of the action and did his part, even if blood was poured on both sides. When everything was said and done, Billy faced the gallows in prison, but he couldn't wait for his face to fall. He escaped from prison and committed further murders. Billy's escape ended in July 1881 when Sheriff Pat Garrett ultimately apprehended him. Nonetheless, his name continues reverberating in the Wild West legends. The Tattooed Girl. Olive Ann Oatman, whose life took a drastic turn in 1851, is seen in this rare photograph. Olive, originally from Illinois, was just 14 years old when the tragedy occurred. The Tonto Apache tribe, a Native American group in present-day Arizona, assaulted and slaughtered her family. She and her sister were captured and kept alive nonetheless, and were later sold to the Mojave people. After a few years with the Mojave, Olive's sister tragically passed away from hunger. But Olive's tale didn't stop there. She was able to reintegrate into American society after 5 arduous years of captivity. The press took notice of her experience since it was surprising. Olive's story gained notoriety through lectures, books, plays, films, and poems. One remarkable aspect of her incarceration that is still up for question is the tattoos on her face. She got the tattoos due to the relocation, which generated interest and media coverage long after its release. Jimmy McKinn Santiago. This image depicts Jimmy McKinn Santiago, a young man from New Mexico's lower Membres Valley. When a gang of Chiricahua Apache, commanded by Geronimo, tragically encountered him and his brother Martin when he was just 11 or 12 years old, his life was irrevocably altered. Martin's meeting did not end well. Jimmy was devastated when they carried him away after the Apache murdered him. For such a little youngster, it's difficult to understand what that must have been like. After 6 months with his captors, he was abruptly ripped from his family and sent to live with strangers. Yet something changed. Jimmy was starting to comprehend their way of life and had picked up on their language. General George Crook finally saved him, but what transpired next was unexpected. After all Jimmy had gone through, he was reluctant to leave. Instead of returning to the Army, he remained with the Apache. He may be seen in this shot living among those who once took him. Fortunately, he ultimately found his parents again. Cowboys in a Saloon. There was more to being a cowboy than merely riding horses and fighting in bars. Beyond the outrageous tales people tell, there was more to it. A bunch of cowboys are seen in a bar near Old Tascosa, northern Texas, in this image from 1907. With drinks in hand, They are seated around the bar and conversing with the bartender. It seemed to be a peaceful period in their difficult life in those days. The best location to release tension was a saloon. Cowboys would drink, play cards, and sometimes even transact in livestock. Not everything was mayhem. There was also significant business conducted here. Some saloons were constantly open, like specific locations today, but the people who frequented them weren't only cowboys. Soldiers, travelers, gold diggers, and even attorneys might have beverages in the same room. There was more to the saloon than simply a bar. It was a bustling hub of town life, where people went to unwind, enjoy themselves, and sometimes do business. It served as a meeting place for many types of people and provided the cowboys with much-needed respite from the arduous journey days. The Navajo People. The Navajo people lived a life of competence and courage. Their everyday lives are seen in this 1873 photograph shot close to Old Fort Defiance in New Mexico. One of the most renowned Native American tribes, the Navajo were famous for their strength and intelligence. Corn ears are seen hanging in the picture, demonstrating their agricultural prowess. Nearby looms are also used to weave the well-known blankets, which has led to their fame and great value. Not all Navajo people were warriors. They also lived ingeniously and creatively. They traded with others and made prudent use of the land to earn a fair livelihood. They survived and prospered throughout difficult times because of their style of life, which struck a balance between craft and hard labor. This image depicts a people who, despite their surroundings, remained resilient and resolute. The Navajo crafted their future while clinging to their heritage. They weren't only getting by, they were moving ahead on their own. Rose Dunn. Rose Dunn became Cimarron, a Wild West legend, at 15. She had a love relationship with the infamous outlaw George Bitter Creek Newcomb. She was a favorite of Newcomb's group because of her beauty and serene demeanor. Their admiration for her was well-founded. She exuded an irresistible charm. Following, the group retreated into hiding after a risky gunfight with U.S. Marshals, but problems arose when Newcomb and another gang member went back to meet Rose and her brothers, who were slain on sight by bounty hunters. Her brothers were ready to collect the $5,000 reward that was placed on Newcomb's head, dead or alive. Rose claimed that she had not given her brothers information regarding the outlaw's whereabouts, and her brothers supported her when she denied that she had set up Newcomb. They maintained that she was unaware of the gang's hiding place or their plans to murder. Rose was never prosecuted for her gang affiliation, despite the accusations that were circulating about her. Rose's name would live long after the Old West vanished, thanks to her tale of peril, love, and treachery. Laura Bullions' Mugshot. Laura Bullions' 1893 mugshot by the Pinkerton Detective Agency tells her tale of crime and survival. Laura, born in Nacogdoches, Texas, 1876, had a difficult childhood because her father was a Native American bank robber and her mother was German. It was not expected that Laura followed in the footsteps of her outlaw-filled hometown. She later joined the illegal activities of renowned criminals Ben, the Tall Texan Kilpatrick, and William Carver, whom she had met as a youngster. Laura was arrested in 1901 for involvement in the Great Northern Train robbery. She was freed from the Missouri State Penitentiary in 1905 after serving only 3.5 of the 5 years she had been condemned to. Laura tried to live a moral life after being freed, relocating to Memphis, Tennessee, and renaming herself Frida Lincoln. Despite working as an interior designer and seamstress, she was never successful. Laura died in 1961 after living in poverty throughout her last years. Adventure characterized her life, yet it ended in silent hardship. The Apache Spirit Dancers. The Apache spirit dancers are deeply ingrained in the customs of southwestern Native American tribes, including the Chiricahua and Mescalero. These communities had to depend on the land and their cultural customs to survive, since they lived in hostile situations where it was difficult to get food and shelter. The crown dance, often known as the devil dance, is one of their most potent customs. According to the Apaches, mountain spirits taught this ancient rite to guard and cure their people. 5 dancers participate in the performance. 4 symbolize the 4 cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west, by donning masks and towering headpieces. They are linked to the ground and the sky by their meaningful gestures. During the performance, the clown, the 5th dancer, plays a vital role in protecting the other dancers and driving away evil spirits. The dance is more than a custom. It represents the Apache people's guiding spirits, healing, and protection. This age-old custom reminds them of their strong connections to their ancestors and the environment. People fleeing the Dakota War. Settlers rushed to flee the carnage that engulfed Minnesota during the mayhem of the Dakota War in 1862. This brief but violent battle began on August 18, 1862, when the Dakota people assaulted communities along the Minnesota River because they were starving and losing their land. Despite barely lasting 5 weeks, the conflict significantly affected both sides. Thousands more were compelled to leave their homes, and hundreds more settlers were slain. The Dakota people suffered a great deal as well. They were forced from their lands and sent to far-off reserves in South Dakota and Nebraska after the war. The Dakota were left with nothing when Minnesota sold what little property they still had. The mass execution of 38 Dakota men, the most in American history, was one of the war's most horrific consequences. This incident brought to light the profound wounds caused by the fighting. It was more than just a land dispute. It was a conflict that influenced the Dakota people's and the settlers' futures, with repercussions lasting for decades. The 3 coffins. The remains of Billy Clanton and the McClary brothers, whose lives were cut short in one of the most well-known gunfights in the Old West, the shooting at the OK Corral. This fatal incident happened in Tombstone, Arizona on October 26, 1881. It was over in less than a minute, yet the effects remained for a long time. Law enforcement officers and a band of criminals known as the Cowboys engaged in combat. With Virgil Earp, the town marshal, his brothers Wyatt and Morgan, and their buddy Doc Holliday adamant about upholding the town's weapons prohibition, tensions had been rising for months. The Clantons and McClarys were among the stubborn cowboys who violated the law. Violence broke out when the 2 parties met near the OK Corral. The brawl ended in a matter of seconds when gunfire reverberated through the streets. 2 cowboys left the scene as Billy Clanton and both McClary brothers lay dead. Despite being wounded, the law enforcement officers emerged victorious, an account of the OK. One of the most well-known Wild West occurrences, corral shootouts have gained notoriety and mystery throughout time. The Unsettling Picture. This unsettling picture seems to be a still shot from the Wild West. A towering, commanding guy wearing a hat stands in the middle, while another person kneels in front of him with their back to him. A lady in a long dress stands beside the guy, her hands clasped and face expressionless. Several other guys in black suits have gathered around them, their features severe and tense. Could this be a courtroom reenactment, or something much more dark? Why does everyone in the picture seem so dejected, and what happened to the individual kneeling? Without a doubt, this arresting image may be considered a curious Wild West scene. It raises the question of what life was like in those days of lawlessness. Is there a more profound secret in this scenario, in your opinion? What tale do you think this eerie scene is based on? Big Noos George. Big Noos George, who racked and murdered his way across the American West in the 1870s, was no typical criminal. After an unsuccessful escape attempt in 1881, his criminal activities ultimately caught up with him. But his post-death circumstances are as peculiar as his life itself. Eager to learn more about a criminal's psyche, Dr. Eugene Osborne conducted a crude autopsy on George. The doctor didn't go empty-handed, but whether he took away any crucial lessons from studying George's brain is unclear. Osborne decided to bring certain aspects of George along. The top of George's skull was severed, and the strange fragment was presented to medical assistant Lillian Heath, who was 16 years old. She discovered some odd use for it, transforming it into a doorstop, ashtray, and pen holder. The strangeness persisted when flesh was removed from George's chest and thighs, and a mask was created from his face. His nipples and other skin were transferred to a Denver tannery where they were used to make a medical bag and shoes. These were saved by Osborne, who famously donned the skin-made shoes when he was sworn in as Wyoming's first Democratic governor. For a year, while further tests were being done, George's remains, or what remained of them, sat in a whiskey barrel filled with salt. After he was done, his remains were interred behind a medical facility. As a surreal reminder of an odd historical period, the shoes constructed from George's skin are exhibited at the Carbon County Museum in Rawlins, Wyoming. Jesse Woodson James's body. Though he was already deceased when the picture was shot, Jesse Woodson James first seemed to be a man at peace. Jesse was an outlaw who was eventually caught up in his criminal life. He and his brother Frank gained notoriety during and after the American Civil War. The two brothers fought in Kansas and Missouri as part of a band of pro-Confederate guerrillas known as the Bushwhackers. They resorted to stealing as a kind of combat when the conflict was over. The James Younger gang was commanded by Jesse and Frank, who committed a string of robberies across the Midwest that targeted banks, stagecoaches, and railroads. Some people nevertheless saw them as heroes despite their violent deeds, even though the public was aware of their illegal operations. The gang persisted until a botched bank heist in Northfield, Minnesota, which led to several members being apprehended or killed. Jesse and Frank continued for a time, but law enforcement pressure mounted. Robert Ford, a new gang member who wanted to collect the bounty on Jesse's head, shot him in 1882, sealing his doom. Jesse James remained a Wild West legend even after he passed away, and people are still captivated by his tale. Chinese field hands. Native Americans were uprooted as a result of the massive flux of strangers brought about by the California gold rush. As California swiftly turned to new government projects, farming flourished as fewer Native Americans and Mexicans remained. Chinese immigrants arrived in response to this labor need and found employment. 4 Chinese field workers are standing together in a moving 1998 snapshot, preserved at a moment that immortalizes their historical contribution. Their contribution could have been forgotten without this picture, mainly because Japanese immigrants quickly replaced many Chinese laborers. This image preserves the memory of these early workers for future generations, reminding us of their importance at a pivotal period in California history, even if the past might have vanished into oblivion. Belle Starr. In the Wild West, this lady was not your typical character. Myra Mabel Shirley Reed Starr, also known as Belle Starr, was born on February 5, 1848, and was a peculiar combination of lady and bandit. Despite her infamous notoriety, she always rode side saddle, following the appropriate traditions for ladies in her day. She always carried 2 handguns strapped to her sides, however. Although she was implicated in several crimes, horse theft was the only one that could be conclusively linked to her. On February 3, 1889, just 2 days before her 41st birthday, Belle's life of crime abruptly stopped. On her way home from a neighbor's house, she was attacked, knocked from her horse, and shot to death. She suffered injuries to her face, neck, shoulder, and back from a shotgun. The identity of her murderer is still unknown. However, some claim that her double-barrel shotgun was the weapon that murdered her. Belle Starr is known today as a woman who bravely survived to the end in a society dominated by men, and much of her life is enshrouded in mythology. Her unwavering energy is seen in how her narrative still enthralls and motivates others. Bloody Bill. When he was born in the late 1830s, his parents named William T. Anderson instead of Bloody Bill. But when he got older, Bill gained notoriety for his involvement in the Civil War, where he led a guerrilla force known as Quantrill's Raiders and fought on the Confederate side. His soldiers left a path of death across Missouri and Kansas as they targeted Union loyalists, earning him a bad reputation. Bill led his gang in a vicious raid on Centralia, Missouri in September 1864, killing 124 Union troops in one day. However, he was slain a month later when his army was ambushed by the Union close to Albany, Missouri. The legacy of his violent life was captured in a haunting photograph shot only hours after his death. His corpse was put on display for everyone to see, and others in the vicinity called him a blood-soaked barbarian. When Bill died, he had 50 knots on the rope he used to record his killings, one for each life he claimed. As a sober reminder of the savagery of his day, his deadly legacy was irrevocably established.
If you've watched the video till here, that means you've enjoyed the video. Subscribe. Don't forget to turn on the notifications bell icon